In this video, I'll be showing you how I turned my spot illustrations into a repeated pattern. I'll be using Photoshop, but of course you can do this in Procreate or many other programs as well. Hi, my name is Carly and I am a mixed media artist, and I specialize in gouache paint, ink work, and digital painting and editing. So these spot illustrations I have here are ones that I did last year during the winter time. I painted them using gouache paint, and they are winter solstice themed. And I scanned these spot illustrations. They were all done on the same piece of paper. And I knocked out the background, and as you can see, the background is gray because that allows me to see if there's any stray pixels or any selections from the paper that I didn't erase. I'll be making 3 different repeated patterns using this selection of illustrations, and I'll be showing you the basics on how to make a repeat pattern, as well as how I edited some of these spot illustrations so that I can have a same but different version, kind of like the pine cone. I did a version where I edited that so I could reuse it and not have the same exact looking pine cone every single time it was tiled. For this first pattern, I selected all the pine-related items as well as the star anise pod and the juniper berries. I just thought that these illustrations went together really seamlessly. I have my Photoshop document set to 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. I have it set to CMYK mode because I plan on having this printed, and the resolution is set to 300 dpi. As you can see along the rulers, I have these blue guides set up. I have it one set to the very center of the document at 5 inches, and then I also have 2 others around the very edges. And what this does is it just allows anything that you move around to snap to those guides, which is really key. After that, I just named this in the layer panel so that I have everything organized. Make sure you have a background color for your pattern because it'll make it a lot easier to have a white square or whatever color you want as your background. Select all your layers you want included to be flattened in your pattern. And I selected all those layers and merged them all together. I wound up moving these around. These are just the main illustrations I'm using. I will be adding more imagery later. These are just the ones I am starting with. Once I like what I see, I flatten it, including the background color, and I'm making a copy of what I just flattened. On one of the pattern layers, I am going to select that and move it all the way to the left until the right edge is hitting the very center. And I am turning on the other layer that's copied, selecting it, and moving it all the way to the right until the left side is hitting that center guide. So now I'm left with this empty space, and we're going to repeat what we just did. In the very center, I'm going to add some more of my illustrations, making sure to have these elements rotated a little bit and maybe even flip them a little bit. With this pine cone, I'm selecting out that pine needle little arrangement connected to it. That way I have one version of a pine cone with the pine needles, and I have one version without. It just makes the pattern look less copy-pasted and gives the eye more variety. I'm doing the same thing to these juniper berries. I'm going to select out a portion of it so that I have the same illustration, but just a different version of it. I'm going to select out just a small sprig of the juniper berries. This will be a good piece to have in smaller filler areas. So the reason why I like using Photoshop is because with things like this, where I'm essentially making a different version of something I painted, the tools in Photoshop make it a lot faster and make it very simple. So right here I'm using the clone stamp tool to edit out that leaf that was going in front of the berry, as well as the area where the 2 stem pieces are merging. I just blended that with the clone stamp tool. it's things like this that just make it very simple. And then to fill in some more space, I'm doing the star anise pod, or is it anise? Star anise or anise? I don't know how to say it. Please correct me. But anyways, I just copy and pasted that and rotated it so it didn't look the exact same. Then I'm selecting all of these PNG transparent layers of my spot illustrations and merging them all together, including the copy and pasted layers from earlier. The ones I merged as squares and just moved side by side. And I'm going to be doing the same thing I did last time. I'm going to make everything one single layer and then copy and paste that merged layer. And instead of moving it from left to right, I'm moving it up and down. So one layer is going to go all the way up with the bottom portion of it hitting the middle guide horizontally. And same thing but opposite, moving the other layer all the way down until the top portion of it is meeting that middle guide. And now we are filling in this blank space. So I'm just filling this in again with more illustrations, more filler stuff. I wound up editing a different version of the juniper berries just so that I had some more variety. So the other portion of the sprig, I'm going to have that as its own illustration. And basically what I'm doing here is I am editing the stem from the bottom, rotating it to the top and blending that in so that the stem doesn't look like I literally just cut it off, because that's what I did, but I don't want it to look like that. So I just copy and pasted the area that I painted the end of the stem and put it on the very top where I just chopped that portion off. And you know how last time I chopped off the pine needles off the pine cone and just kept the pine cone? Well, I'm doing the actual opposite of that. And I'm also copy and pasting some of those pine leaf needle thingies, and I am adding that to the bottom so it has a smoother transition towards the end of the stem. I am actually taking the stem from the other pine needles I painted and editing that onto these ones just so it looks more complete, because that was where the pine cone was and I just cut that off. So it just looks more complete this way. And then you see how the pine needles, the same exact ones, look on that pine cone from earlier? Well, I'm rotating this around differently so that it doesn't look the exact same. And I also made the decision to just keep one of those pine needle sprigs. I didn't really need both, and honestly, it was just taking up a little too much space. So, and there was one right underneath it that had 2 sprigs on it, so I was like, alright, that's enough pine needles, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, so now I am exporting this as a high quality JPEG. And I am testing out my pattern on this website called Bardo Brush. It is bardobrush.com/repeat, and you just copy and paste or drag and drop your pattern right in, and it can show you what it looks like, and it even lets you adjust the scale, see the pattern in a very small size versus a large print. So yeah, that was basically the process on how to do a repeat pattern. I'm going to go ahead and show you how I did the other 2 patterns. I'll be showing you guys how I edited the other spot illustrations so that I can get more out of them. So the next set of illustrations I was going to make a pattern out of was this snow owl skull, this black widow spider, and these holly berries. So the first thing I did was I selected the main key illustrations for this pattern, which is the owl skull, the crystal, and the black widow spider. I arranged them roughly how I want them to be and repeated a couple of them. So I have the owl skull twice, and I have the other one tilted and flipped the other way just to give some variety and to reduce that look of tiling. And I did the same thing with the crystal. However, I felt like the crystal could use more variety because when you flip it, it just doesn't, it still looks too similar. So what I did to fix that was I just selected out the larger portion of the crystal and I flipped it horizontally. And I like using the polygon lasso tool for this because it just lets you go in and chop up whatever you need to chop up and to just get around those jagged areas especially. And I did leave a little bit of that crystal cluster down at the bottom. Then I tilted it the other way. That way when this is tiled, it doesn't look like it's facing the same direction as the other crystal. Now I was looking at this and it felt incomplete, so I felt like I needed a different spider. I didn't want to repeat this one because the positioning of the spider is so specific. So luckily I paint spiders a lot, so I just referenced one of my mushroom paintings where I have a spider crawling, and I thought that would be a good one to repeat and do different versions of. So I just selected that out. First, I just used the rectangle marquee tool to select out that spider just to reduce any distractions. Then I selected the magic wand tool, clicked on the background of the white paper, and if you're not getting a clean selection on that, what you can do is go up to the toolbar on the very top of the window and hit select and then scroll down and select similar. Then to make the paint match how I painted the other Black Widow spider, I adjusted the hue and saturation to be a lot more warm and not so blue toned, and I also increased the sharpness. That way the blending on this spider on how I painted it matches how I did the other spider. And then I just placed that spider in the corner. I'll probably end up changing that a little bit later, but we'll see. Next, I wanted to switch up one of the owl skulls a little bit because they're looking a little too much the same. You know, I mean, I can't really edit it to make it look different that much. So I decided, hey, maybe I could do kind of like what I did with the pine cones in the last pattern, where one of them had some pine needles and a little arrangement behind the pine cone. I thought I could do the same thing, but with one of the holly berry spot illustrations. And so I just made like a little berry arrangement behind the owl skull, and I thought, you know, that makes it a little bit different enough. So then after that, I'm just placing some holly berries in any areas where I felt like it needed some filler, and I'm just so glad I painted so many because that's less Photoshop work I have to do. And I might just rearrange this later, but for now this looks good. And I'm going to merge those layers, duplicate it, and then move them side by side, and then start working on that empty space in the center. Now, because this spider is crawling, I felt like this allowed me more room to play with it. Like, I felt like I could warp this spider or tilt it in a different direction to give the illusion of spiders crawling everywhere versus the other spider. You know, it's just kind of stuck in that position. So I duplicated that one, I photoshopped back in from another painting, and now I'm adding some more berry branches. After that, I just merged these layers, and I am doing the same thing, except I am duplicating the layer and moving one up and one down, just like I did with the last pattern. Then I'm going to go in and fill in some of these spaces. Even though I did make quite a few spot illustrations of just berries, I did end up running out of them, so just a few of them I wound up either flipping horizontally or editing them in some way. After this, I exported it as a JPEG and I dropped it into the pattern preview window thingy, and this is what it wound up looking like, and I'm pretty happy with it. So for the next pattern, I decided to do a holly leaf and berry themed print. I thought this would be a good pattern for a lot of people, not just people who like spooky things like me, like maybe they don't want spiders on their patterns. I thought it'd be good for the holidays though. As you can see, I only have one cluster of like holly branches, like with the leaves on. So I decided to copy and paste that, and I'm making a version of it with only 2 leaves. That way it looks consistent but still different. I also tried photoshopping the end of one of the other branch stems onto this illustration to make it look more realistic, but I just opted for erasing the edge a little bit and making it more rounded looking, and decided that looked better because the width of the stems in the other illustrations didn't really work with this one. I also kept that selection of the leaf I edited out earlier and copied it onto another layer so that it could be its own filler spot illustration. That way there isn't too much red going on with just the berries. I wanted there to be some stray leaves as well for filler. I also copy and pasted the stem from one of the hollyberry spot illustrations and added that onto this stray leaf to give it some more color. The stem also makes a really good finishing edge to the leaf that I selected out. I then did the same thing to another leaf I decided I wanted to have a version of on its own. Once I got the basic images that I wanted to use in this pattern, I just filled in the space in the very center with the excess holly berries that I had on their own layers. Once I have this arranged to my liking, I'm just going to do what I did earlier and flatten it completely, including the background color you want to use. I then duplicated that layer, and on one of the layers that are merged, I moved it all the way up, and on the other merged layer, I move it all the way down. Then after that, you just fill in this empty space in the center. Again, I'm making sure that when I copy and paste some of these spot illustrations that I am rotating them, especially if they're really close together. You want them to not look so tiled. Then I just did the same thing as earlier, merged the layer, duplicated it, moved one to the left and moved one to the right. And then I'm just doing that process again, filling in that empty space with any spot illustrations for filler. Making sure to look around the whole pattern tile to make sure there's no images that are too repeated, and if they are, that they're flipped and rotated or altered in some way. And here's what that pattern looks like. I think it looks so cute, definitely perfect for Christmas, and I could definitely see myself printing this on some dinner napkins for a holiday meal, or maybe even a tablecloth. Thanks so much for watching my video, and I really hope that my process helps you to think of some ways to recreate some designs out of any old artwork that you have laying around. You can just scan it and make a pattern out of anything, really. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I'll see you next week. Bye!